welcome into Grimm's Case of Horror. My name is Grimm, this is New Haven for all things horror movie related, and today I'm going to be ranking movies from one of my favorite horror franchises of all time, and that is Friday the 13th. I think Friday the 13th is one of the first horror franchises that I ever watch, not binge, but watch all the way through. I think it was about around 2016 when I started to binge all of the Halloween movies, the Friday the 13th, Paranormal Activity, The Conjuring. Those were the horror movies that I was watching. The Insidious movies. I mainly just stuck with ones that I was more familiar with or that were suggested to me around that time. Friday the 13th was one of those that I just watched because I think the game was about to come out. People were playing the game, and I'm a big fan of the game as well. It sucks that they shut it down. And Friday the 13th is one of those franchises that I love. I love Jason Voorhees, the character. Everything about it, everything about the franchise, I just love. I'm here to tell you my thoughts and opinions on them from the worst ones to the best ones. And I'm also making this video because this video will be going up on June 13th, which will be Friday the 13th. Not only that, but June 13th is Jason Voorhees' birthday in the universe. So it's kind of like, when I heard that, I'm like, okay, I have to make this video. I have to do a ranking of these movies. And just to be clear, I've only seen all these movies one time. I haven't really rewatched them. I think I rewatched the original a couple times, but I mainly watched the remake that was made in 2009. That's the one I'm more familiar with, and that I think is more rewatchable. And coming in 12th place, we have it's weird. We've had 12 Friday the 13th movies. They didn't even end it on a 13th movie. No, we ended it on 12. We need another one. We have Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday, and this is the 9th movie in the franchise. And this movie is one of the more bolder and more ambitious takes on the franchise, as we see Jason being ambushed and seemingly destroyed by the FBI. His spirit survives, and he possesses different people by transferring his essence. I think it was a coroner who eats his heart. So we get some body horror in this movie, and it really just takes the franchise in a whole different perspective. And basically we see the resurrection of Jason once again by the end of the movie. And basically Jason, we find out that they take a Halloween cult type of vibe with this one, where basically Jason must inhabit a member of his bloodline while only a relative wielding a mystical dagger can permanently kill him. If you look at the dagger from this movie, it looks really reminiscent of the dagger in the Evil Dead, and I think that's kind of what they're going for. There's some Evil Dead references throughout this movie. For me, I just think this is the weakest installment in the franchise. It's just so different and is really takes us away from what makes the Friday the 13th movie so lovable and enjoyable and entertaining. But I give the director Adam Marcus props for trying something different, trying to make this franchise feel fresh and new. But when we get into the stuff about Jason being connected to a bloodline that was a part of a cult or was cursed, it's just not the Jason that I love and the Jason that I have in mind. And this is one of the movies where we have the legendary Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees, which I also think Jason's look in this movie, when we do see him in the beginning and at the end, I think this is the worst Jason look for him, in my opinion. But when Hodder is on screen as Jason, which is at the start in the beginning, his presence remains menacing. And I feel all the cast do what they can with the material that they have, but again, I just didn't like how they really mostly sideline Jason and focus more on this paranormal, spiritual, supernatural side of the franchise. I just didn't like it. And so moving in 11th place, and I gave Jason Goes to Hell a C-, because that movie can literally go to hell. Moving on to Jason X, and man, I do like this movie. And Jason X is a wild ride in the franchise, as it takes Jason Voorhees into space because why not? It's just so fun, and just the idea and concept just sounds so fun, and that's basically what this movie is. It's not to be taken seriously. It's not to win an Oscar or It's for basically just to have fun and to goof off, and I believe it does make fun of itself a little bit throughout the movie. And so this movie is a blend of sci-fi and slasher horror, which I hope we get more like of sci-fi horror in the future, because I feel like we don't get enough. Like if we could get a Star Wars horror movie, that could go crazy. And so this basically follows after Jason goes to hell, with Jason cryogenically frozen and waking up in the year 2455 aboard a spaceship. Naturally, he resumes his favorite pastime, which is killing everyone in sight. And yeah, so basically, I believe like the government like captures him and like puts him in like underground in like a cryogenic freezer, and they try to execute him, and it just ultimately fails. And so they put him in cryogenic stasis. And then 445 years later, a group of students on a field trip to Earth stumble upon his body, and they bring him aboard the spaceship. And then he thaws out and begins a killing spree throughout the spaceship. And I actually really like the look that he has in this movie, like before he turns to Uber Jason. I think it's one of my favorite like looks for him. I think it's the same look he has in Freddy vs. Jason. I could be wrong. Those movies I think are also connected, which I will talk about. But this movie doesn't aim for any like deep explorations like some of the other movies does. You just have a bunch of like basically two-dimensional characters. Like there's just some characters that are just dumb and arrogant, and like they don't want to believe that Jason is real, and so you have that opposing side to all the people who are like, Jason's here, Jason's trying to kill us, blah blah blah. The movie also leans into like the self-aware humor, acknowledging how crazy and chaotic this concept and premise is, and like the idea of Jason being studied for his abilities to regenerate and like resurrect and like basically not die, even though it's just mostly just an excuse to keep him alive throughout the franchise. I love how they touch on that a little bit. This movie also serves as Kane Hodder's fourth and final performance as Jason, bringing his signature physicality to this role. And the rest of the cast, including actors like Lisa Ryder, Chuck Campbell, Lexa Dewig, they all do their best with the material, but the material is just basic, generic. Especially since Lisa Ryder, she portrays like an android or like a humanoid robot who fights Jason. And there's just a bunch of campy charms throughout this whole movie that I just enjoyed. But again, it's not supposed to be amazing. It's just supposed to be fun and entertaining. And that's why this movie is low. And I give this movie a C+, because I do enjoy it. I have a lot of fun with it, but it's one of those guilty pleasure, like Taco Bell type of movies where you know it's not good, but you still enjoy it. You still like to watch it, and you get some, and yeah, you get some fun out of it. So moving into 11th place, we have, man, this one hurts so bad, and we have Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan, and I remember liking this movie a lot. Like when I first watched it, this is my second time watching this movie ever. But I remember watching it for the first time, and I thought this was such a fun idea, fun concept, and it's one of the most ambitious of the franchise again. And it follows Jason as he stalks a group of high school students who go on a cruise ship to New York City, which is crazy because this cruise literally just goes from New Jersey to New York, because New Jersey is where like Camp Crystal Lake is. You have Packanack, you have Camp Crystal Lake, then you have Higgins Haven, then on the other side of the lake you have Pinehurst. But basically this movie, only like the final act follows Jason in Manhattan. The rest is them on the cruise ship getting from like Crystal Lake all the way to New York. But this movie is more like Jason like goes on a boat, or like it's the Sweet Life of Jason Voorhees, or like Jason Voorhees on the Sweet Life of Dick. Like that's what this basically is. Basically him going on a killing spree on a cruise, and then it sinks, so they just so happen to swim and end up at New York City. And just the way that they resurrected him in this movie was just so funny, because he was like under the water from the previous entry of Part 7, The New Blood. He gets resurrected by like a power cord that is like underwater. And because like the anchor or whatever runs into the power cord, and so it electrocutes Jason, who's underwater, and resurrects him that way. Which is just so funny to me. But so yeah, he climbs up aboard the ship and he starts killing high schoolers, the crew. And then once he gets to New York, we have some funny and like campy interactions of him with like people just on the streets of New York, but also him chasing down the remaining survivors that got off the ship. It's just another one of those fun entries in the franchise where you don't really take it seriously, but it's also like kind of disappointing because this movie was marketed as Jason Takes Manhattan, so Jason in New York the whole time, when no, really, this movie I think this movie had like some budgeting restrictions, and that's why the New York sequences are limited to the third act, and so they only had enough budget for the final act to take place in New York. Yeah, that just sucks a lot. And so I think this movie was divisive for that, because most of the movie is not even taken in Manhattan yet, in New York yet. It was marketed that way. But if you put all that aside, I think this is a decent and solid entry in the franchise. It's not one of the best, but I think this is also one of the best like Jason looks that we've had, and it's also one of my favorite kills in the franchise, where the boxer like basically just punches Jason, just a whole scene where he just punches Jason in the face over and over again, and Jason takes the punches until the boxer is all tired, and then he's like, "Show me what you got, motherfucker," and then just punches his head all clean off. One of the most badass, one of the most like iconic kills in the franchise was that one, and I loved it so much. And then the whole plot that we follow with the victims and the survivors, I didn't really care for. The main parts that really caught my attention were just like the fun kills and blood and all that. Because in these movies, it's kind of hard to like get invested into the story, because you just know almost everyone's gonna get killed anyway. So it's like, as I was watching these movies, it's like I was getting invested at first, but then after like a certain part, I just stopped getting invested and just embraced like the fun slasher blood of it all, the violence that goes on. I just embraced that and just started enjoying that more. I stopped getting so like invested in. And the story on this one is basically just generic. And again, this also has Kane Hodder in the role. I feel bad. I'm putting all the Kane Hodder movies like pretty low, and I'm not meaning to. Kane Hodder. Let me just say, Kane Hodder, I believe, is is like the best Jason Voorhees we've had, like without a doubt. He's legendary, and he's probably the most redeemable part about these movies, in my opinion. But yeah, with all that in mind, Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, goes in 10th place. Moving into 9th place, we have Friday the 13th Part 5, New Beginning. Now, this movie, I feel like, is one of the more underrated ones, but, I mean, it's pretty low for me, but I also think I'm a little, like, conflicted about this movie. I mean, I do enjoy it, but there's also some things about it that I didn't like, some decisions that were made, and so let's just get into it. Part 5, A New Beginning, is set a few years after the events of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which was the 4th movie, and it follows the one character that has survived the longest throughout this franchise, Tommy Jarvis, who is a troubled teenager who is haunted by his past encounter with Jason Voorhees. And he is at Pinehurst Halfway House, which is a facility for teens that are dealing with the trauma, who are struggling with their mental health, and then a series of brutal murders begin, and we all assume that's Jason Voorhees, but at the end it's revealed that it was some random guy. Basically took this franchise in a different direction, because we thought it was Jason all along, but it turned out to be, because at the beginning of the movie, one of the teens that are staying there gets killed by another one of the teens. And then it turns out the guy who's dressing up as Jason was the father of the kid who died. So in a way, it was kind of like the first Friday the 13th, but this time it was a father, and I think that's what they were trying to do with it, but it just made fans like disappointed in it. Like I said, I'm a little conflicted on it, because on paper it sounds good and everything, but then when you think about the audience and everything, and like for me it is a little disappointing, but I do feel disappointment. I'm like, dang, it's not Jason. But then on the other hand, I'm like, okay, that was almost like a great like rug pull move where you wouldn't expect that, but then it happens, and you're like, that's different. Like, I did not expect that, and that's why I kind of like it also. Another thing that I'm a little conflicted about is this movie is the one that kind of has this franchise start to go into the campy, cheesy route and starts to get a little goofy. But then on the other hand, they also try to focus on Tommy and try to make him kind of like the main star, the main character of this franchise, when he's only in like three movies of the franchise, the 4th, 5th, and 6th. And I really like the character of Tommy Jarvis, from Corey Feldman in the 4th one, John Shepard in this one, and then my favorite is Tommy in the 6th, and Jason Lives. And this movie tries to delve deep into Tommy's trauma, and it kind of like reminds me of Sienna's in Terrifier 3, kind of like trying to go that route. But I feel like Terrifier 3 does better when it switches from like the comedy of art to the serious and emotional side of showing Sienna's trauma and all that. I feel like this movie doesn't do that as good because we see Tommy, who has hallucinations of Jason, and he fears that Jason is still going to haunt him and like hunt him down, kill him. And then we see him have outbursts towards other people in this halfway house, and like we see him like beat up one of the other guys who like steals one of his masks and like scares him, and like it like triggers him. But I think one of the best aspects of this movie is the frequent kills that go on, because there's just a bunch of kills within this movie, and I think it's one of the more gruesome and more provocative like movies in the franchise. And I found myself liking a lot more of the characters that were in this one. But yeah, this is just one of the movies that I'm more conflicted one, and for the other ones I feel solid and like sure about how I feel about those. Yeah, that's why this movie is in 9th place. And moving into 8th place, we have Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. And to be honest, going into watching these movies, I thought Jason Lives was going to be my favorite, because I remember loving it so much, like this version of Tommy Jarvis. But it ended up being kind of like low for me on my list. And this movie follows Tommy Jarvis after the events of Part 5, who is still haunted by his past encounters with Jason, and he goes back to Crystal Lake. He goes to the grave of Jason Voorhees, and he attempts to cremate the corpse of Jason. Basically, he takes his frustration out on Jason's corpse. He like takes like a bar from like the fence of the cemetery, and he like just starts stabbing Jason's body, his corpse, and he leaves it in, and it's storming and everything, and a lightning strike comes down and resurrects Jason. And this is where we start to get more, when we start to see Jason as a unstoppable like supernatural entity. Like he's just a whole powerhouse, and he just goes on a whole murderous rampage with his super strength and everything at the original Camp Crystal Lake, which has been renamed to Forest Green. And throughout the whole movie, Tommy struggles to convince the authorities, the police in the town, of Jason being back, because they think Tommy is crazy since he was in the halfway house, and they just don't believe him. But this movie kind of fully embraces the campy and like the goofy side of the franchise. It kind of reminded me a lot of like Evil Dead 2 with like some of the humor that went on. But this movie also kind of makes Tommy Jarvis to be like an action hero almost, where they kind of make him to be like Arnold and Terminator, or like Rambo type of character, where the movie came out in 1986. So they kind of like fully embraced and tried to make this kind of like an action / horror slasher, and I think that's what kind of just didn't do it for me, because this movie is self-aware with the humor, and it has like these gothic horror elements with like the cemetery and resurrecting Jason. But like Jason is no longer just a mass killer in these movies. At this point, he's a superhuman like zombie menace, and it's just like a big shift that happens for the franchise. And this movie also is kind of like meta humor as well, because it breaks the fourth wall and acknowledges slasher tropes within this movie, which later influenced movies like Scream. But I just found myself more enjoying the more serious and like more simple entries within this franchise. And I think Tom Matthews, I hope I said Thom, I think the H is silent, Tom Matthews, who delivers like the best performance, I think, of Tommy Jarvis. Like he's just so iconic in the role, portraying his desperation and determination, like trying to get these police officers to believe him and to go out and help him kill Jason or take him down. And then we also have CJ Graham as Jason, who I think is like the second best Jason Voorhees that we've had, bringing such a menacing physicality to the role. And he basically just provides the emphasis on Jason's like new supernatural strength. And I think Tom McLaughlin's direction in this movie is one of the more like standout, like, iconic of the franchise. As like I say, there's more action elements in this, with some car chases and shootouts to the horror formula, making this movie more dynamic. And then he also embraces dark comedy within this movie, and for me, I just didn't like those elements within this movie. I just like it to like stay horror. And just the comedy that happens in this movie is just not my type of comedy. That's why this movie is so low for me. So, with all that in mind, Jason Lives is in 8th place. Moving on to 7th place, we have Freddy vs. Jason. I think I forgot to mention it. So there's a theory going around that because Freddy vs. Jason comes out after Jason X, and at the end of Jason Goes to Hell, we see like Freddy Krueger's hand pull Jason's mask into the sand underground, and so there's a theory that Jason X is actually Jason in Freddy's like dream realm or like nightmare hell type of place. And I'm just gonna start off right now. I mentioned before, I've only seen 2 other Nightmare on Elm Street movies, so I was even like debating whether to put this in here because I feel like it's not really fair to add this movie when I haven't really seen the context of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, since this is a sequel to both Jason Goes to Hell and the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. They're sequels, so this is a sequel to both franchises. So, but I only watched the Friday the 13th franchise, and so I don't know what happens in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies that leads up to this. But basically, this movie follows Freddy Krueger, who is weakened and forgotten by the events of his latest movie, the one before Freddy vs. Jason, and he devises a plan to regain his power, and he does that by resurrecting Jason again and manipulating him into killing teenagers on Elm Street to make them like scared and fear him and make people believe that Freddy has returned, but really it's just Jason doing his bidding. Jason isn't easy to control, and so Jason fights back against Freddy's control, and that just leads to an epic battle between both Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. So we basically just follow this movie of Freddy trying to manipulate and use Jason, while Jason embodies that relentless and like trying to resist the control that Freddy is trying to have on him. And also delves into revenge as both of the killers try to seek control over their victims and also each other, trying to like, it's kind of like a battle because we also have like all the human and victim characters, but then we also have Freddy vs. Jason. So this movie just basically plays with the idea of legacy, as it brings together two iconic horror killers into one movie from 2 different franchises, and it basically confirms like there's a shared universe, which I want to make a video on that. There's like a whole shared universe with a bunch of like horror movie icons and slashers, and I want to make a video on that because you'd be surprised at how many of these movies are actually connected. But yeah, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger delivers such a charming and sinister performance, which also marks his final portrayal of Freddy Krueger. And then we have Ken Kersinger, who takes on the role of Jason Voorhees. Again, I think the way Jason looks in this movie is my favorite look for him. And then we have the supporting performances from Monica Keena, Kelly Rowland, and Jason Ritter, to name a few, that add to the film's chaotic energy. And then we have Ronnie Yu directing this one with a stylish and more energetic approach, blending the distinct tones of both franchises. As at the beginning, it really does feel like a whole Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I'm like, throughout like the first half of the movie, I'm like, should I even put this in, because it feels more like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But as we get more into it, we actually get some flashbacks of like what Jason went through as a child, getting bullied by the kids at Camp Crystal Lake. It just adds more insight into Jason as a character, and just something that we haven't seen before in the franchise, which I thought was a great touch. We also get some flashbacks with Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mother, who is played by a different actress. I don't know her name, but I love how even in a movie like this, where it's entertaining, it's fun, and it's also like it's almost kind of like fan service, they're also able to throw in some new things, some things we haven't seen before, and just make it more interesting, make it feel fresh. I think this movie totally works if you like both movies of the franchise, and how this movie is able to balance the horror with the action and ensure the film is entertaining while delivering the brutal like violence that you'd expect from these movies. And just that final battle with Freddy and Jason at the end is just so iconic, so entertaining to watch, and it just makes you feel like satisfied, like by the end of it, which I loved. And so with all that in mind, moving to 6th place, we have Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. I thought this movie was going to be lower because I just feel like this installment is one of the more forgettable movies in the franchise. I thought I got some enjoyment out of it. I thought it was really interesting with the approach that they take. This movie also injects like a supernatural twist into the franchise as we follow Tina Shepard, a teenager with telekinetic abilities, which is similar to like Eleven in Stranger Things, who she accidentally resurrects Jason from his grave at Crystal Lake after going through like an emotional breakdown by Crystal Lake. And then when he's resurrected, he goes on another brutal killing spree. And then Tina must harness her powers and learn to control them to stop him, basically. And so it's kind of reminds me of like I haven't seen the original. It kind of reminds me of like Firestarter in like Friday the 13th mixing, but instead of fire powers, we have telekinetic abilities. So it kind of just feels like a superhero movie mixed with a horror slasher, which, you know, I love both of those genres. So we see more psychic horror elements in this movie, blended with slasher brutality. But then we also see Tina, who struggles with her abilities, like deals with her trauma, and like basically I believe she was like studied on throughout her life. After finding out she has these powers, and ultimately killing her father, and she's basically exploited by her psychiatrist for his own gain. And so we get a story with that. I thought it was one of the more unique and interesting of the human and like survivor storylines that we've gotten throughout the franchise. Like Laura Park Lincoln, who plays Tina, delivers a compelling performance, bringing the emotional depth to her character's like battle. And then we have Kane Hodder in his first movie as Jason, which is where he establishes the menacing physicality that he uses that would define this movie through the next 3 or 4 movies. And his just presence and brutal kills just elevate the movie. One of the reasons why this movie is higher for me. And this movie was actually supposed to be a lot more like violent and like gory, but it had to be toned down and be censored a lot. But despite this, the movie's visual style and Jason's design just remain one of the more memorable for me. I feel like this installment franchise is one of the most underrated. I really did enjoy it, and I just love like the whole premise of Jason versus telekinetic individual. I can see I kind of feel like when it comes like Vecna versus Eleven in Stranger Things, I can see where like they put inspiration from this movie, or that they could have, and I kind of see that now within this movie. Moving into 5th place, we have Friday the 13th Part 2, and this is getting to like the parts where I don't really have any problems with these movies. It was just difficult to put them in placings, and I just like the ones after this one a lot more. Friday the 13th Part 2 is the first sequel of this franchise, and it builds upon the legend of Camp Crystal Lake, directed by Steve Miner. And the film introduces Jason Voorhees as the primary killer, and this is the first movie with Jason as the killer, and this is like the one where he has the iconic like sack as a mask instead of the hockey mask, which he gets in the 3rd movie. This movie set 5 years after the original massacre and follows a new group of camp counselors training near Crystal Lake. As they settle in, Jason, who has been living in the woods, begins his killing spree, targeting anyone who dares to enter his territory. And this movie is set around the Packanack house, where the first one was in Camp Crystal Lake. This one's now in Packanack, which is a little farther away, but it's still in the vicinity of Crystal Lake. If you look up like a map of Crystal Lake, you'll be able to see like where houses are. I'll probably show a picture of it on the screen. I think they're fan made, but I think they're also interesting to have and just look at to see how close in vicinity these movies take place. And so this is the first movie where we see Jason emerge and basically try to seek revenge for the death of his mother, and he just hears his mother's voice in his head, and as he remains like just a shadowy figure lurking in the background in the wilderness, and you just feel like he's just out the corner of the screen. And just the use of music, I thought this while watching the first 4 movies, I felt like the music in this franchise might be better than Halloween. And I know that will be such a controversial take, but I just the way that the music in this franchise makes me feel, and then playing Friday the 13th game, because I played it for like years until it got like shut down. I just feel like Friday the 13th, the music is just a lot better and a lot more, adds so much more suspense, and makes you more like scared and uncomfortable than like the Halloween music. I feel like the Halloween music, it gets you more excited, it gets you like more pumped up. This one, it just makes you feel like what's happening, what's going on. So that's why I say that. I just feel like it's a lot better when it comes to horror and like adding to the suspense and like being and when it's used in this franchise. Yeah, we have Amy Steele, who plays Ginny, who delivers a stand-up performance as this movie's final girl, one of the most iconic final girls within the genre of horror, and she just brings such intelligence and resilience to her role. Then we have Adrienne King, who only like briefly reprises her role as Alice, and that's another thing that that I kind of like have a nitpick with this franchise. With this franchise, it's kind of like, I think I had the same with like Final Destination. It's like you don't really follow a specific person. It's like each movie there's new, more like different characters. So it's like you can't. It's really hard to get invested into these characters and into this franchise, and so you mainly get invested into Jason and his character. And you like root for him more, it feels like. And I just wish, that's why I kind of really liked Tommy Jarvis, for example, because we see these girls survive and everything, but we never see them again after that. This is one of the only instances where we follow Adrienne King as Alice from the first one, as Jason hunts her down and kills her for chopping his mother's head off, basically. Yeah, I just wish if they continue the Jason Voorhees movies, which I hope they do, the Friday the 13th movies, I hope they just add another like Tommy Jarvis type of character to the franchise. But yeah, Steve Meyer's direction just enhances the film's atmospheric like suspense, using shadowy cinematography and tense pacing to build suspense, which I love in slashers, just to build up to it and then just like get one of those kills. One of the more brutal movies with Jason using a variety of weapons and like using like a pitchfork, a machete, and ice pick. But this also shows like the classic and like the first ever like uses of like practical effects in horror, which I just love. And just seeing how much more advanced and more creative we've gotten with using practical effects, and just like the decision to keep Jason's face hidden throughout the whole movie until the climax, and like he's unmasked and you see his ugly face and all that. It just makes like the conclusion and the resolution more satisfying. Yeah, one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. I wish I could place this higher, but the other ones I just liked a lot better. And so moving on to fourth place, we have Friday the 13th, the original. And it's the first movie of the franchise, directed by Sean S. Cunningham. The movie follows a group of teenage camp counselors attempting to reopen Camp Crystal Lake, only to be stalked and murdered one by one by an unknown killer. And I feel like this movie is unique in itself as well, because we don't know who the killer is until the ending, until the final act. And so we follow this movie, and basically it's like kind of like in the POV of the killer, so you don't know who it is. So it's like different from like Scream, for example, where Ghostface is in a costume, so his identity is hidden. But to hide it in this movie, we just follow in the POV of the killer as they kill. And the movie begins with a flashback to 1958, where two camp counselors are murdered, and then fast forward to 1980, and a new group arrives at the camp who don't know about the dark history, and as they prepare for the reopening of Camp Crystal Lake, they are killed off one by one. And then we find out in the climax that it was Pamela, Jason's mother. And then we get the whole explanation of what happened to Jason, who drowned and was neglected by the counselors. Which is one thing I like a lot more about Freddy vs. Jason, because before we just knew that he drowned. But in Freddy vs. Jason, we find out that he was bullied, and basically he was drowned by the other kids. And basically the other counselors just didn't care, they weren't paying attention. And they basically just let the kids drown Jason. And so when you think about that and you see the context behind it in Freddy vs. Jason, this movie came out in 1980. It took them so long to 2003 to give us a little more context and background around what happened to Jason. And at that point, after watching that, you start to realize, like, you start to understand why Pamela was so mad and so like vengeful, and why she went on these killing sprees and went crazy. And it just adds so much more to her character, and like you kind of like sympathize with her, or like you feel bad for her, because she's just a mother who was grieving because she doesn't know what else to do. Like, her son is gone, no one did anything about it or try to stop it, basically. So after watching that, I just have a lot more respect. I just love the character of Pamela Voorhees a lot more as a killer, and also one of the first like women in the genre that are like killers. I have to point that out as well. And then the whole setting, like I think this is the first movie that has like the whole like summer camp like setting in a remote forest, and that just heightens the tension and like the suspense, being trapped all the way from civilization. And then this movie also helps establish like genre staples like the final girl element and just like the creative kills in horror movies. It's just helped like solidify and like establish the simplicity of slasher movies. And then Betsy Palmer, who plays Pamela Voorhees, delivers such a chilling performance, one of the most iconic killers in all of horror, shifting from the just how she goes from just like a normal like mother to just a pure menace is just one of the best like performances and portrayals in like horror history. And then we have Adrienne King as Alice, who is one of the most iconic final girls within horror, taking down Pamela with like cutting her head off. And then we also have Kevin Bacon in such an early role for him, and then one of the most iconic deaths and kills within horror as well. Also, this movie was made with the budget of like $500,000, I believe, and that's why Sean S. Cunningham uses like POV shots to obscure the killer's identity. He used that to create suspense, and because they didn't have a big budget to like really show a lot of blood or like anything like that. But when they did show the blood and the violence, it was worth it. It was well worth it. But a lot of the kills felt like they were like off screen and all that, which makes me like appreciate like Hell of a Summer that just came out this year, because they did the same thing and it was like a really low budget on that movie. Now that I watched this one, it kind of makes me appreciate Hell of a Summer a lot more, because my expectations, it feels a lot more almost like inspired, and like you can see that they were trying to do what they could with their budget in this movie, and also in the new Hell of a Summer, which is a summer camp movie directed by Finn Wolfhard. And then I have to talk about the whole kid Jason jumping out of the water and pulling Alice under, one of the most iconic Friday the 13th franchise. Yeah, I can't complain about this movie at all. It's like, it's just so perfect. Like all these movies from the second one all the way up to number 1 in this list is just perfect. It's hard to talk bad about them. But moving in from Friday the 13th, we have Friday the 13th Part 3, which is such a pivotal moment in the franchise because it's the first movie where Jason has the hockey mask, and it picks up immediately after the events of Friday the 13th Part 2. And the film follows Chris Higgins and her friends as they head to Higgins Haven, a lakeside property near Crystal Lake. And Jason Voorhees is wounded but alive, and he hides out in the barn. As the group settles in, Jason goes on another brutal killing spree, killing anyone who comes into the barn, and then ventures out to kill the rest of them. But then we also find out in this one, Chris, the final girl, the protagonist in this movie, has like a personal history with Jason, adding a more psychological layer to the movie. As she goes off with a guy in this movie, and basically she explains to him how she was taken by some man, and then she woke up in her own bed, and her parents never explained to her like what happened or anything. And we found out that Jason was the man that took her after she ran away from home, and his wife never returned back to Crystal Lake or came back to Higgins Haven because such traumatic events that happened to her. And so we finally see her reunited with Jason, the person who took her, and she becomes like the final girl within this movie. This movie also leans into the classic slasher tropes of things such as like partying and like ignoring warnings leads to like the consequences of getting killed, and like basically sets the standards for like the rules of how to survive a horror movie, which we see later in Scream with Randy Meeks. This movie helps establish those rules and everything. But yeah, Dana Kimmel delivers such a solid performance as Chris, portraying like vulnerability and a mix of like resilience. Then we have Richard Brooker as Jason, who portrays like Jason as like a normal human, but like just with like a bulky, big physicality. Then we have the supporting cast like Paul Kraka and Tracy Savage, who just embody the typical horror archetypes. Like we have the prankster, the stoner, the romantic couple, and man, justice for my man, what is his name? Shelley? Yeah, justice for him. I think Shelley is, I felt bad for her when he died. Poor Shelley. Just these classic like horror movie like stereotypes just adds to the film's tension and then eventual carnage. And like this, like one of the movies where I felt like I cared about these characters, like a few of them, because we see more of like, they're not as two-dimensional as they are in this franchise. We get to know them a lot better than we do in other movies, and so when they get killed off, I'm kind of like, no, I want them to survive. And yeah, Steve Miner, who is the director of this one, he also directed Part 2, and he like focuses this movie on like 3D effects. I think this is where 3D started to become big, and so this is one of those movies that came out in 3D back in the 80s, making it the only movie that was released in the 3D format. And so a lot of the shots that you can tell were made to give it that 3D effect. Like I believe some guy was on the balcony above, and like he was using a yo-yo, and like you could see it like coming down, and like you could tell that was made for like a 3D audience, or to watch it in 3D. But yeah, again, this movie just filled with such creative kills, and just seeing the character of Chris like take down Jason and then escape Higgins Haven on the boat as Jason runs after her, so iconic. So with that in mind, Friday the 13th Part 3 is in third place. Moving into second place, we have Friday the 13th, 2009, which is the reboot or remake of the slasher franchise, directed by Marcus Nispel, who also did, I believe, the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I watched that movie, back when I watched this one as well. I don't remember much about that movie. The movie follows Clay Miller, played by Jared Padalecki, who you might know from Supernatural, as Sam Winchester, as he searches for his missing sister, Whitney, who was adopted by Jason Voorhees while camping near Crystal Lake. Meanwhile, a group of young adults arrives at a cabin for a weekend getaway, only to be hunted down by Jason. This movie kind of reimagines Jason as a fast and more brutal killer, and it incorporates more survivalist elements into the character of Jason. As we see how in the original franchise he would teleport around, or he would get from one place to another so fast. In this one, he has tunnels under Crystal Lake where he's able to get around and just a lot quicker. I like how they try to explain that more, dive deeper into that. And I feel like if you're going to get into this franchise, this is a great start just watching this reboot, because it basically combines the whole franchise into one. Some of the best elements, like the movie starts out with a scene a compilation of scenes of Jason getting killed, and then Pamela getting her head chopped off. Not from the original, but from this one, basically just setting up the legend and the lore and the backstory of Jason Voorhees. And then we see him in the Part 2 mask at the beginning, and then he finds the hockey mask later within the same movie. So it kind of combines the first three, and then Clay Miller, Jared as Clay, kind of reminds me a lot of a Tommy Jarvis type of character, as he's coming to Crystal Lake looking for his sister. Danielle Panabaker, her death within this movie was so shocking and jaw-dropping. They portrayed her as such a final girl, only to kill her off in such a shocking way, and you're just no, why would they do that? And yeah, it just sucks. The way that they kill her off, it just feels like such a punch in the gut. And it's probably one of the more shocking kills within this franchise. I just love how this movie also gets you to care about these characters as well. But this movie really emphasizes on Jason's predatory nature, making him more of a hunter than a supernatural force, which I love. I also love how they kind of did that with the first few movies as well. He was more going on a vengeful killing spree. He didn't just do it just to do it. He was basically seeking revenge, and that's how I feel about this movie as well. And then we also explore Jason's backstory in this one, showing his attachment to his mother's memory. And they don't follow those some of the lore and legends of how Ginny in the second movie wore Pamela's sweater to try to make Jason think she was his mother. We don't really get that, but we get basically get the sister. I forgot her name. I don't really know any of the characters' names throughout this franchise. I'm just gonna be real with that. But she has the locket that Jason's mother has, and she puts it on, and and so Jason kind of doesn't kill her because he doesn't think she is his mother, but she kind of resembles her. So that's why I feel that's why Jason didn't kill her in this movie, because she just reminds him so much of his mother. And even when she says Jason to his face, he looks up and he's but also this movie just keeps the franchise's signature elements, the isolated setting of Crystal Lake, and just the way that people die in this movie is just so gruesome and so unexpected. The boat, when the guy gets killed by Jason with a bow and arrow. Who would have thought we see Jason with a bow and arrow? That was cool. And then also when the girl tries to hide under the pier, and then she just gets pierced in the head with the machete. That was so cool. But yeah, Jared delivers a solid performance as the protagonist of Clay, and then Danielle Panabaker as her character. And then we have Amanda Variety, who bring the emotional depth to their roles in this movie. And I just wish we really did get a follow-up to this remake. I feel this is where they could have gone on for 4 or 5 other movies. I believe this movie didn't perform as well as they thought, as they wanted to. So that's why we didn't get a sequel. Even though I think Kane Hodder, CJ Graham are some of the best, I do think Derek Mears is a more terrifying version of Jason, in my opinion. The others, Kane Hodder and CJ Graham, they're more menacing. Their physicality of being bulky, slow, but also non-human. In this one, I feel he's more terrifying because he feels more human. He feels more predator, going on a vengeful mission. And I feel that kind of grounds the character more. And I kind of like that a lot. And like I said, Marcus Nispel, who directed this movie, he worked on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of 2003, and he just brings that gritty and intense visual style to this movie that I just love about it. The cinematography within this movie just enhances the suspense, and the action sequences are just brutal, violent, and just fast paced, which I love. There's also a more modernized approach to this franchise, which I also love. I just wish we could get more Friday the 13th movies. I think that's why, like, in a Violent Nature, a lot more that came out last year, I believe, or the year before that, because it felt so much like a Friday the 13th movie. Just like, it was just really different. But moving into first place, we have Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. And this was meant to be the grand finale of the franchise. That's why it's called the final chapter. But as you know, that never really happens. And I think Jason Goes to Hell was called The Final Friday as well. Like, he got, like, a couple more movies after that. Not a lot, but there were still sequels to it. But the movie picks up immediately after the events of Part 3 with Jason, who is presumed to be dead, and he's taken to the morgue, but then he comes alive, escapes, and continues his bloody rampage at Crystal Lake, where a group of unsuspecting teenagers and the young Tommy Jarvis, played by Corey Feldman, became his next targets. And so this isn't in Crystal Lake, or like around, well, it's around Crystal Lake, but it's farther from Camp Crystal Lake. We're at the Jarvis residence, where there's the Jarvis house and then the house that these kids were staying in. But this is my favorite Friday the 13th movie of all time after rewatching them. This movie, like, explores Tommy Jarvis, a horror-obsessed kid who becomes such a pivotal character in the franchise with this movie, then the fifth, and then the sixth, in embodying the psychological toll of encountering Jason. And then we see him deal with the trauma of that Part 5, as he's just a kid who encounters Jason, and he tries to fight him back, and he tries to protect his sister. We see him, like, outsmart Jason a couple times. Like, literally in the final act, he, like, shaves his head and pretends he's Jason as a kid to try and, like, distract him, and then his sister comes in and kills him. And Corey Feldman, one of his best roles, is such a stand-up performance as Tommy, and brings a mix of, like, innocence and then just eerie intensity. And then we have Crispin Glover in one of his most memorable roles, provides an awkward yet endearing presence as one of the kids who is trying to, like, hit on and get with one of the girls. Joseph Zito's direction within this movie leans more into the atmospheric tension and violent horror, making this one of the more polished entries of the franchise, in my opinion. And I feel like the kills are the most creative and brutal, and I just love the setting of the Jarvis houses. Like, they just keep going back and forth from house to house, like, getting chased. I just think that is just so funny, and just feels so almost like they're trapped just by these two houses. Like, if they try to run to the woods or off, like, they'll get lost. So they try to stay in perimeter. But yeah, there's nothing I can say that's wrong about this movie. It's just the best in the franchise, in my opinion. Just the way, like, they use the music, and, like, I believe, I forgot which character it was, but, like, they walk out of the house and then they get stabbed, and just the lightning, like, flashes, and you see this girl getting impaled through the stomach with a spear, and you see the silhouette of it on the house. And just that imagery, it just makes you, it's just so intense. It makes you feel like, it gives you chills, just because of, like, how it's able to, like, still keep up to this day with that. Like, this is the best of the franchise. Let me know what y'all thought about this franchise down below, or, like, how would you rank this franchise from the worst to the best? I would really like to hear your thoughts, your explanations for why you put your entries where you do. Yeah, I hope y'all did enjoy this video. If you did, please drop a like, subscribe if you are new, and turn post notifications on to get notified when I do post again. Trying to post every week, and I was so excited to watch this franchise again, make this video for y'all, because this is one of my favorite horror franchises of all time. Jason is one of my favorite, like, horror characters, icons, up there with, like, Chucky, Billy Loomis as Ghostface, and so on and so forth. So yeah, subscribe, join their gremlins, and all my socials will be down in the description below. I have my Blue Sky, my Instagram, my TikTok down there, so you can follow me down there, and I also have my Twitch down there, so you can follow me there and get notified when I do go live, because I've been streaming a little bit more, play Marvel Rivals, Fortnite, and I want to get more into Dead by Daylight, since the FNAF update is coming out this month, so I kind of want to play that as well on stream. So if you want to, like, chill with me, talk, my Twitch will be down below, so you can follow me there. I also like some feedback. Let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, what I can improve on. I know I need to get better lighting, and I'm just going to tell you right now, I have a lamp over here. If I turn the lamp on, it illuminates the whole room, and it takes away, like, the LED red light effect. So that's why I'm trying to figure out alternative solutions to this. I plan to get a ring light to help like illuminate me, see if it helps the background. I didn't expect this to be as bright as it is. I just put more batteries in this thing and it's lighting up like crazy. But anyway, if you want to check out the Friday the 13th movies, I believe the first one is on Tubi, and then part 2 through 8 I believe are on Pluto. But to be honest, I recommend checking it out somewhere else, because there was like 8 ads throughout each movie when I watched, and like they just cut at like the best parts. Like they insert an ad at like the best parts of the movie, and so it's like, come on, like it got annoying for me. So if you want, I'll have links down below in the description so you can check out these movies yourself and rent them. I think that's the better alternative. Yeah, I think that's better than checking out on Pluto. I believe Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X, and Freddy vs. Jason, those aren't on any. So just to celebrate Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, the whole franchise, down below right now.